I never imagined my own son would have to stand up at his wedding to defend me. At 67 years old, I thought I had seen it all. Funerals, births, betrayals, reconciliations, but never a humiliation so public, so unexpected, so calculated as the one I lived that day, with the church full, the flowers perfuming the air, and all eyes fixed on me, as if I were an anomaly that someone had to correct. The future mother-in-law of my son, a woman with a shrill voice and forced manners, stood up in the middle of the ceremony. It seemed like something inside her had exploded just when the priest asked for silence to start the blessing. She pointed at me with a bony, trembling finger and shouted, "That is not a father, that is a disaster in a suit." There was a stifled murmur. I froze. The bride laughed. Her laugh was short, sharp, like a knife stabbing directly into a man's pride. But the one who did not laugh was my son. He just looked at me, and that look said more than any speech. I saw him slowly stand up from his seat, a movement so unexpected that even the priest stopped breathing for an instant. My son, my boy, my pride, walked toward the altar as if dragging an immense weight. No one knew what was about to happen, not even me. But before continuing, I would like to know if you subscribe to William's Revenge Stories, and if you liked the video. This helps me see that you support me and enjoy my stories. Now let us continue. I was wearing a dark blue suit that was a little big on me. I had lost weight in the last few months, not from illness, but from worry, from tension, from fear of losing a relationship that was already wobbling too much. The truth is that I never quite fitted into that family. For them, I was always too simple, too quiet, too working class. A man who worked all his life in auto repair shops was not exactly the ideal father for a brilliant lawyer who was going to marry the only daughter of a wealthy family. I had taken out a loan to pay for the suit. I wanted to look dignified next to my son on the most important day of his life. I wanted him not to feel ashamed of me, but perhaps, without realizing it, I was trying to patch up years of emotional distance between us. He had flourished in a world different from mine, surrounded by people who talked about investments, travel, organic diets, and real estate. I was still the same man who fixed his car barefoot on Sundays. Even so, my son never stopped calling me Dad, even when his future wife frowned upon hearing it. She even told me once, very subtly, "I do not want to make you uncomfortable, Arthur, but in our family we prefer to keep up appearances. You could, I do not know, behave more like a guest than a protagonist." I smiled, although inside that phrase went through me like barbed wire. Her mother, the mother-in-law, was worse. I never heard her say a kind word. She treated me like someone who was in the way. She corrected my posture, the way I spoke, even the way I pronounced some names. "Your accent is too strong, Arthur," she had told me once at the engagement dinner. "Do not worry. It is not your fault. There are people who are born with more cultural limitations than others." And the bride, her daughter, nodded as if it were the absolute unquestionable truth the day of the wedding, seeing me enter with my simple suit and my tie that I had knotted 3 times so it would stay straight. The bride already looked at me with contempt. But I did not come to impress anyone. I came to see my son's happiness, or so I believed, when the mother-in-law shouted that cruel phrase, "A disaster in a suit." I felt my blood freeze. I wanted to answer something, but my throat closed up. The laughter of some guests echoed in my ears like bells of mockery. My son turned sharply toward her. I saw how his jaw tightened. And then, with a calm that was frightening, he approached the altar. "Father," before continuing, my son said, looking at the priest, "I have something to say." The church went into absolute silence. You could even hear the creaking of the pews when some guests moved to see him better. The bride frowned, annoyed. The mother-in-law crossed her arms, as if she were sure that my son would defend her. But I knew that expression on my son. It was the same one he had when he discovered, as a child, that a teacher had treated one of his classmates unfairly. Something was going to break. I felt it in the air. "After what they just said to my father," he began, "I cannot pretend that everything is fine." The bride opened her eyes wide. "My love, do not make a scene," she whispered from the altar, faking sweetness. But my son did not look at her. He looked at me, and I will never forget that mixture of pain, rage, and decision on his face. "I'm not going to allow," he continued, "anyone to humiliate the man who raised me with broken hands and a whole heart." The guests started whispering among themselves. The mother-in-law rolled her eyes. I did not know where to hide. I felt my legs trembling, and before continuing with this ceremony, my son added, "I want to reveal something that I have kept for too long." My heart stopped for a second. I did not know what he knew. I did not know if it was something about me, about him, about the bride. But the tension in the church was so heavy that it seemed like every word of his would fall like lightning. The bride tried to interrupt him. "Can you leave this for later?" she asked with a tight voice, but he shook his head. "No," he answered with a firmness that echoed throughout the church. "It is now, at that moment." One of the bridesmaids let out a small scream, not of fright, but of surprise, as if she had just connected dots that she should never have connected. I could feel how the air changed, how something big, devastating and definitive was about to come out of my son's mouth. And then he said it. "Before marrying me," he pronounced with a firm voice, staring at the bride. "I went through your phone." The bride went pale instantly. The entire church held its breath, and I knew without a doubt that this would be the beginning of the end. When my son said he had checked his girlfriend's phone, I felt the whole church breathe at the same time. I did not know what he was going to reveal, but by her expression, by the trembling in her hands, by the way the mother-in-law tried to stand up discreetly, I knew it would not be something small. I knew that moment would break much more than a ceremony. But before all this, long before the wedding, there were signs that a father wants to ignore because one loves his son and convinces himself that he is happy, even if something inside says otherwise. I had been observing my son's relationship with that young woman for months, his now almost wife, and every day I wondered if he really saw himself reflected in that family or was simply trying to fit into someone else's mold. The first time I met her, she shook my hand without looking me in the eyes. I remember thinking, maybe she is shy. But then I understood that it was not shyness. It was arrogance, disguised as politeness. She talked about me to my son as if I were not present. "Your dad should clean up a bit more," she would say. "Or would it not be better if your dad stayed home for Christmas? My family wants something more intimate." And him. He tried to justify her. He said she was stressed, that it was her way of speaking, that I should not take it personally. I tried. I really tried. The mother-in-law was even worse. She treated me as if I were a system error, an intruder, a stain on the white tablecloth of her perfect family image. And the most painful thing was how the bride laughed at every cruel comment, as if I existed only to serve as a target for their mockery. But my son, he did not laugh, never. That was what kept me standing. Even though I saw how the distance between us grew bigger, even though I felt he was molding himself for a world that did not belong to me, his look toward me continued to be that of a son who loved me, even if he was trapped in a relationship that overwhelmed him. There was a key moment, a day that marked me deeply. It was 2 weeks before the wedding. My son came to see me without warning. I saw him enter the house with his shoulders slumped, as if he were carrying an invisible weight. "What is wrong, son?" I asked him. He sat at the table, rubbing his forehead. I made him a coffee, as I always did when I saw him exhausted. "Dad," he murmured, "did you ever feel like you were living someone else's life?" I watched him in silence. It was a question too big to hide with a smile. "Yes," I finally answered, and there is nothing sadder than that. He gripped the cup tightly. "I do not want to disappoint her," he said, referring to his fiancée. nor her family. And yourself, I asked him. He did not answer. There I understood that my son was sinking into a tide he did not know how to stop. What I did not know was that he had already discovered something terrible, something he would carry with him on the wedding day, a day before the event. My son arrived home again. He was pale, nervous. He paced around the living room, unable to stay still. "Dad," he said suddenly, "would you tell me the truth, even if it hurts, always?" I answered. He took the phone out of his pocket. He had it in his hand, but did not turn it on. He held it as if it burned. "I saw something I should not have," he whispered, something about her. My breathing stopped. I did not want to imagine, but my mind raced on its own. "What did you see?" I asked. He shook his head. "I cannot tell you yet, but tomorrow. Tomorrow I am going to make it public if necessary." "Why not today?" I asked him, desperate to reach him before he collapsed, because I still want to believe it is not what it seems. He answered with a sadness that broke me. "But if tomorrow, in front of everyone, the masks fall, I am not going to protect anyone." I hugged him. I felt his trembling breathing against my chest. My son was trapped between guilt, duty, and disappointment. I, as a father, could only hold him. That night I almost did not sleep. The mother-in-law, the bride, their hurtful comments, their gestures. Something had always been rotten, and my son had seen the root of that rot. We returned to the church. My son was there, at the altar, pointing out that he had checked his girlfriend's phone. The murmur grew. The bride went pale. The mother-in-law pressed her lips together until they turned white. "What did you find?" the priest asked, astonished. My son took a deep breath. "Conversations," he said, "with someone who is not me." An absolute silence. Heavy. Fell over everyone. The bride swallowed hard. "Love. That means nothing." My son raised his hand. "I have not finished," he said, because they were not just conversations. My legs went weak. I leaned against the pew. I felt like the air was escaping me. "There were photos," he continued. "Dates. Plans." The bride closed her eyes as if she wanted to disappear. The mother-in-law shouted, "Do not talk nonsense. That is private." My son looked at her with a disarming calm. "Yes," he answered. "It was private, but not between mother and daughter, but between your daughter and another man, a man who, by the way, you knew very well." The bride let out a choked sob. A guest gasped. A bridesmaid began to cry. And then my son said the sentence that broke the wedding into 1,000 pieces. "Mom," he looked toward where I was sitting, "you were always my example. That is why today, in front of everyone, I want to tell you something. I am not going to marry someone capable of betraying before even starting life together." His words resonated like thunder inside that silent church. The mother-in-law screamed. The bride collapsed, and I could only stay there, trembling, knowing that that day, although painful, was also the day my son finally chose himself. When my son finished speaking at the altar, the church turned into an ocean of whispers, cut breaths and trembling glances. The bride was on the floor, supported by 2 bridesmaids. The mother-in-law was screaming that everything was a lie, while trying to lift her dress so as not to trip. And I was just there, sitting, feeling my heart pounding like a hammer in my chest. I did not know if what I had just heard was the end of a wedding, or the beginning of something much bigger. But while my son continued speaking, I remembered something, that he had been keeping something to himself for weeks that he wanted to tell me. Something that had burned his tongue, but that he had not pronounced out of fear, out of shame, or maybe out of love. And that afternoon, in front of the whole church, I knew he was not only talking about infidelity. There was something deeper, something he had discovered, and that had destroyed him inside, before even reaching the altar. My son took a step back and wiped his hand across his forehead, as if trying to wipe away the weight of everything he had said. I could see the tremor in his fingers, that tremor I knew since he was a child, and was afraid of disappointing me, that tremor that appeared when he was about to break. "Dad," he said then, looking at me from the altar with a mixture of vulnerability and bravery, "there is something I did not tell you before. I will never forget that moment." His voice broke a little. It was barely perceptible, but I heard it as if it were a scream. I got up slowly from the pew. I did not want to embarrass him. I did not want to pressure him. I just wanted to be present. "Say it, son," I responded softly. "I am here." The bride, still on the floor, murmured between sobs words that made no sense. "It is not what you think. I love you. Your mom. Your mom." The mother-in-law, with her face red like a rotten tomato, kept screaming that everything was an invention, that her daughter would never do something like that. But no one was listening to her. The attention of the world was fixed on my son. I did not check the phone out of jealousy, he continued. I checked it because days before, someone told me something. My breathing stopped. "Who?" I asked. He extended his hand toward me, as if he needed to anchor his strength in my presence. "You, Dad." A dense silence fell over the church. I felt a sudden dizziness, as if they had thrown a bucket of cold water on me. Me. What had I told him that led him to check the phone of the woman he planned to marry? The priest observed everything with his hands joined. Without knowing if he should intervene or let the truth do its work, my son continued. "That night, I went to your house," he said. "I heard you talking while you washed the dishes. I thought you were talking to me, but no, you were talking to yourself, you said. If he knew what I saw that day, he would not reach the altar." A murmur ran through the benches. I closed my eyes. I had forgotten that detail. I had forgotten that my son was in the living room when I, without realizing it, let that fatal phrase escape, because I had indeed seen something that broke my soul. "Dad," he continued, "when I heard that, I knew something was wrong, and although you did not want to tell me, although you stayed silent, I could not keep ignoring the signs. I was afraid to face it, afraid to face her, but you gave me the courage without meaning to." I opened my eyes full of tears. My son had discovered on his own what I wanted to keep quiet, so as not to destroy a future he thought he wanted. "Son," I whispered, But he raised his hand asking me for silence. "Let me finish," he said with a firm tone that filled me with pride. He took a deep breath. "I checked the phone because I remembered something you told me when I was a child. The truth hurts, but the lie kills. And Dad, the lies almost killed me." The mother-in-law screamed. "That is enough. My daughter is not to blame for anything. It is him who is destroying this family." He stared at her, for the first time, not with fear, but with a serenity that intimidated her. "Madam," he said, "I am not destroying anything. I am only showing what you hid." The bride stopped crying. She raised her head. Her eyes were full of rage, not sadness. "You are not innocent either," she told my son. "Do not play the martyr." And then my son, with a tiredness that seemed to carry whole years of pain, responded, "Maybe I am not perfect, but at least I did not build my life on lies." The echo of those words bounced off the walls of the church. The bride began to get up slowly, holding the arm of a bridesmaid, but when she stood up, everyone could see how the phone slipped out of the pocket of her dress. The phone fell to the floor and the screen lit up. A message appeared right in front of everyone. My son came down from the altar, bent over, picked up the phone and looked at it. Just a few seconds. His expression did not change. He already knew everything. But the whole church did change. "Here it is," he said, showing the screen to the public. "The message she received just 15 minutes ago while walking toward the altar." The bride screamed, "Do not open it!" But it was too late. My son read out loud, "Sure you want to get married? You are still in time to escape. You know that last night you were with me, and that you would repeat it." The church exploded in screams. The mother-in-law collapsed on a bench. The bride, in absolute shock, could only say, I did not. My son closed the phone calmly, handed it to her, and pronounced a phrase I will never forget. I'm not going to marry someone who cheats on me, and even less with someone who laughs at my father. And then, in front of everyone, he turned toward me. Dad, let's go. My eyes filled with tears. My son, that man I thought lost between two worlds, had chosen ours. I extended my hand to him, and together we left the church while chaos erupted behind us. We left the church walking slowly, as if every step weighed a ton, not because we doubted what we were doing, but because we had just left behind a fire that we could still hear burning, the screams of the mother-in-law, the tears of the bride, the bewilderment of the guests. Everything echoed behind us as we advanced toward the main door. When we finally crossed the threshold, and the fresh air from outside hit us in the face, my son stopped. I looked at him. His breathing was agitated, his hands trembling and his gaze lost in an indefinite point. He stood still, without letting go of my hand, as if his body had told him that is enough after enduring so much. Son, I whispered, fearing he would collapse. He did not answer. He just let himself fall. He sat on the stairs of the church, put his elbows on his knees, and covered his face with his hands. He was not crying, but I could feel the pain coming out of every pore of his skin. I sat next to him, without saying anything. Sometimes a man does not need words, but company. The wind moved the flowers of the exterior arches, tearing off some petals that fell on us like an improvised funeral. Behind us the door remained open. In the distance the uproar could still be heard. But there, on that cold step, it was just him and me. For the first time in a long time without a wall between us. Dad, he said at last, with a broken voice. At what moment did I stop recognizing my own life? I did not answer immediately. I took a breath, searching for the right words. You did not stop recognizing it. I told him. You just filled it with people who did not recognize you. He lowered his head more, shook his shoulders, trying to contain something he had been accumulating for months. I feel like an idiot, he whispered. You are not. Yes, Dad, I am. I held on to someone who never truly loved me, and the worst is that, even when you and I were distanced, I thought it was all my fault. I thought that if I did more, if I tried harder, if I worked more, she was going to see me. And no, she never did. I wanted to tell him that I also had blame in our distance, that many silences of mine had been wrong decisions, not lack of love. But it was not the moment for that. That moment was his. She did not make a fool of you. I told him. She made you believe that you needed her approval to exist. And you just wanted to form a family. He lowered his hands. His eyes were red, but not from crying, but from holding himself together too long. I checked her phone because I was afraid. He confessed, not out of jealousy. I was afraid that you were right, that what you saw and did not want to tell me was unbearable. I felt a prick in my heart. Son, I murmured, I did not tell you because I thought that if you were doing it for love, you had to discover it by yourself. He stayed silent for a few seconds. And what was exactly what you saw? He asked. I wiped my hand across my forehead. I had kept that memory like someone protecting a wound still open. I saw her. I answered, hugging that man in the supermarket parking lot. Not just any hug. It was one of those that, my son closed his eyes. And why did you not tell me? Because in that moment I thought maybe there was an explanation. And because I did not want to be the one who destroyed your engagement. You were already so involved, so deep in that life. I thought that if there was something bad, it would come to light on its own. He took a deep breath. It came out, he murmured, and in the worst way possible. No one came out of the church yet. It was as if the entire building was holding its breath. We, outside, were two men trying to rebuild ourselves on a staircase. Neither he nor I were perfect. He had tried to fit into a world that was not his. I had kept silence too long. But there we were, father and son, united in ruin, but more united than ever. "Dad," he said then, "do you know what hurt me the most? What that she laughed at you?" My heart tightened as if someone squeezed it from the inside. That moment, he continued, that microsecond, that mockery, that arrogance, that contempt, hurt me more than her infidelity. Because you do not deserve that, and neither do I. I could not contain the emotion. I did not cry, but I felt my eyes filling with a moisture that had been refusing to come out for years. "Thank you, son," I whispered. He nodded. "All my life," he said. "I thought strength consisted of enduring criticism, enduring humiliations, enduring comments, enduring people. But today I realize that true strength is knowing how to leave, knowing how to say enough is enough." I looked at him with a pride that did not fit in my chest. "Then you are strong," I told him, "because you left just when you should have." He took a deep breath, as if the words released him from an ancient weight. "Dad," he murmured, "can we get close again? Can we try? I do not know. To heal what we let get cold." My voice took an instant to come out, that instant in which the soul shakes itself. "Of course," I answered. "It is never too late when we both want to." We stayed in silence, looking at the empty street. The sun was beginning to go down, painting the sky with orange and pink tones. It was a simple scene, almost daily, but for me it was like being born again. My son stood up, offered me his hand. I looked at him, and in that gesture, simple, firm, sincere, I found everything I thought lost for years. When we were going to leave, the church door opened. The mother-in-law appeared first, with her makeup runny and her hair messy. She walked toward us with quick steps, furious. "This is not going to stay like this," she shouted. My son turned slowly. "Yes," he answered. "Yes, it is going to stay like this." She trembled with rage. "You destroyed our reputation," she spat. My son raised an eyebrow. "I did not destroy anything. I only pulled back the curtains so everyone could see what was behind." The mother-in-law pointed at him with her finger. "You are going to regret it." My son smiled, a calm smile, mature, almost dangerous. "No," he said, "I believe the ones who are going to regret it are you." And then, without looking back, we started walking, without knowing that the worst had not happened yet. We walked a few meters away from the church before my son stopped again. I thought he had gotten dizzy or needed to sit down. But no, what had stopped him was something else. The certainty that there were still truths buried under that family we had just left behind. Truths that he was going to face, even if it hurt him, even if it hurt me. "Dad," he told me without looking at me, "there is something I did not tell you. Something I discovered just 2 days ago." The wind blew and lifted dry leaves around us, as if the world itself shuddered with what my son was about to reveal. "What is it, son?" I asked, feeling a knot tighten in my throat. He took a deep breath and looked at the ground. "I did not only find messages on her phone," he said. "I found audio files, conversations, with her mother and with that man." My heart skipped a beat. "What were they talking about?" I asked, although I was not sure I wanted to know. He raised his gaze, and I saw in his eyes a pain so deep that it almost broke me too. "They talked about me, Dad," he said, "about how I was not up to par, about how you were a nuisance at the wedding, about how they could handle me and use me." My blood froze. "Use you for what?" "For money," he responded, with a mixture of shame and rage, "to get benefits, so that I would support a project of theirs. They even talked about, if necessary, exaggerating the pregnancy to rush the wedding." I put a hand to my chest. I felt a sudden dizziness. How far did the manipulation of that family go? What kind of people were they? My son kept talking, but his voice was no longer broken. He had the voice of a man who had woken up. "For months," he continued, "they made me believe that this wedding was the best thing I could do, that she loved me, that they respected me, but every kind word was poisoned, every gesture calculated, and I fell like an idiot. I put a hand on his shoulder. You are not an idiot. You fell in love. That is not a shame. He smiled bitterly. Yes, but I did not fall in love with the person I thought. I fell in love with a fabricated version. He stayed silent for a few seconds. Then he continued, with a voice that trembled from intensity. Not weakness. And the worst, Dad, is that those two, the mother-in-law and the bride, laughed at you constantly. In the messages, in the audios. They even had a nickname for you. A pang went through my chest. What nickname, I asked. My son hesitated, but he answered, the ballast. That is what they called you. I closed my eyes. I felt as if a gigantic hand squeezed my heart. Ballast. Something that hinders, something that drags, something that stops progress. That was me to them. But before I could answer, my son spoke again. Dad, you are not a ballast, you never were. But they wanted me to see you as a weight, to separate me from you, to control me better. I leaned on the nearby wall. Everything was spinning, but there was something even darker behind his gaze. I knew it. I felt it. Son, I murmured. What else did you discover? He swallowed hard. I discovered that that man she was talking to was not just any lover. He was someone hired by her mother to manipulate her, to make me seem like the best option, so that I would feel responsible for her and her emotional stability. I was left speechless. My son continued. They wanted to make sure I got married, whatever the cost. That phrase pierced me. And why such obsession, son? He clenched his fists, because I had been promoted recently, and because a part of the company where I work was going to open calls for partners. The mother-in-law knew that, and she thought that if I got in, her family got in too. Her contacts, her investments, her last name. I raised my head slowly. So, the whole relationship was a plan. My son lowered his gaze. I do not know. Maybe at the start, no. But at some point her mother took control. She turned her into an instrument for her ambition. I stood still. I felt a deep pain, as if someone had taken something that belonged to me, not the bride, not the wedding, but the time, the love, my son's innocence. Silence wrapped around us before continuing. Tell me here in the comments what you think of this story so far and what you would do in his place. Do not leave the video, because what comes next will give you goosebumps. My son sighed. Dad, that morning, before the wedding, I already knew I was going to cancel it, but I did not know how to do it without destroying you. 2. Me? I asked, surprised. He nodded. Yes, because I knew that if the wedding was ruined, the mother-in-law was going to blame you publicly, and I could not allow that, not after everything you have done for me. I felt a tremor run through me. My son, the man who had just broken an entire wedding, was still thinking about protecting me, and that is why you spoke like that at the altar. I asked. Yes. I had to expose the truth myself. Let the guilty ones be them, not you. I wiped a hand across my face, trying to process everything I had heard. You are strong, son, I whispered. I was because you taught me. He answered. At that moment we heard quick steps behind us. When we turned around, we saw one of the guests coming, running, agitated. Arthur, your son, you have to go back. Something happened inside. My son and I looked at each other. Something horrible. Something unexpected. The masks were not just falling, they were about to break completely. When that guest arrived running toward us, with his face distorted and his breathing ragged, I knew something terrible had happened. Not a simple anxiety attack, not a common faint. Something that was going to change the course of this story even more than it had already changed. Because tragedy, when it arrives, does not hit just once. It comes in waves, and that was just the next one. You have to go back, the man shouted, with eyes wide like coins. It is the mother-in-law. She fainted. No, he responds. My son stood motionless for a second. I do not know if it was surprise, fear, or simply disbelief, but after that brief instant, he reacted and began to walk toward the church with quick steps. I went behind him, feeling my heart accelerating more than it should at my age. Not because I worried about that woman, who had despised me without pause since the first day, but because I knew that anything that happened inside that church would be used against us. Tragedy is a very easy tool to manipulate. When we entered, the chaos had multiplied. Some guests were trying to leave hurriedly, others shouted meaningless instructions. In the middle of the central aisle, surrounded by people uselessly leaning over her, was the mother-in-law, pale, motionless, with her eyes half open. The bride was crying beside her, but not a cry of true pain. I had already learned to distinguish them, but a hysterical one, almost theatrical. I heard her repeat a phrase over and over again. This is your fault. Your fault. My son approached slowly. I felt the whole atmosphere tighten, as if every person in that church expected him to collapse or ask for forgiveness. But he did neither of those things. What happened? He asked with a voice that could only be described as mature and tired. An aunt of the bride answered. She had an attack. She started screaming, insulting them, running toward the door, and suddenly she collapsed. Nerves, surely. Look what you provoked. My son tightened his jaw. She provoked this herself, he answered. I only told the truth. The aunt opened her mouth to reply, but at that moment, a paramedic arrived whom some guest had called. He cleared the area with firm movements and knelt next to the mother-in-law. He took her pulse, looked at her eyes, moved his head slightly. She is breathing, he said aloud, but she is very unstable. We have to take her outside. Call an ambulance. The bride cried louder. Mom! Mom! But my son did not move. He observed everything with an icy calm that I had never seen in him. It was not coldness. It was dignity. After months of manipulation, humiliation, and lies, he had found a type of strength that did not need screams or blows. It was a silent strength, dangerous, powerful. When the paramedics lifted the mother-in-law onto an improvised stretcher, she partially regained consciousness. She opened her eyes, saw my son, and her face deformed into a mixture of hate and fear. You, she whispered, you destroyed everything. My son took a step forward. No, madam, he said firmly, you destroyed everything. I only removed the blindfolds. The bride let out a shriek of rage. You have no right to speak to her like that. Not after what you did to her. My son raised his head. What I did to her, he answered, turning toward her with a chilling calm. Do you refer to exposing the truth, to defending my father, to not marrying you while you were with another man, if that is doing harm? Then yes, I am guilty. The bride stood up swaying. Her tears had turned into pure fury. You understand nothing. Nothing. You were part of a greater plan. She just wanted the best for me. My son raised an eyebrow. The best, using a man to climb in status. Manipulating me? Laughing at my father? Cheating on me? Is that the best? The truth is having a mother like her? My son responded without raising his voice. And you do not know what it is to have a father like him. I felt a knot in my throat. I did not need him to defend me, but I would keep that moment forever. The paramedics took the mother-in-law toward the exit. The bride wanted to go behind, but before doing so, she turned toward my son and looked at me too. Her eyes were burning. This is not over. She spat with poison. You are going to regret it, both of you, I swear. My son looked at her with the same serenity he had since everything exploded. No, he answered slowly. This is just beginning. For you. The bride ran out after the stretcher. The guests began to leave the church in uncomfortable silence, as if they were witnesses to a crime they did not know how to process. My son and I remained standing in the empty aisle. The church, previously full of flowers, music, and false hopes, had turned into a cold and hollow place, as if everything real had been ripped from it in a single pull. I approached him. "Son," I said carefully, "are you okay?" He wiped his hands over his face. "I do not know Dad," he admitted, "but I am free. And that is a beginning." I stayed by his side, mirroring his posture. The main door was still open. Outside, the sirens could be heard in the distance. The wind entered through the windows, moving the tablecloths and the petals as if someone wanted to erase all evidence of what happened. "I told you the worst had not happened," my son murmured suddenly. I looked at him. "What do you mean?" He swallowed hard. "The audios are missing, Dad. The ones I have not told you yet. The ones that reveal who was really behind everything." My heart skipped a beat. "Who?" I asked. My son lowered his voice as if he feared the walls could hear him. It was not just her mother, nor just her lover. He took a step closer and whispered, "There was someone else. Someone we know. Someone you would never imagine." For the first time all afternoon, I was afraid. When my son said there was someone else involved, someone I knew, I felt a cold run down my back, as if someone had opened a door to winter inside the church. He was not a man of exaggerations. He never had been. So if he said there was a third party implicated in that game of manipulation, it was because he had proof, and because that name weighed more than he could pronounce without preparing me first. "Who is it?" I asked, my voice barely a thread. My son lowered his gaze, took a deep breath. I could see his chest rising and falling with difficulty, as if the simple fact of saying it was a direct blow to the stomach. And there I understood something. The real enemy had never been the bride, nor the mother-in-law. They had only been pawns in something much bigger. "Dad," he whispered, "it is someone who has been in my life since I was born. Someone you would never suspect, and someone who, unfortunately, was always too close." I leaned on a pew. My legs threatened to fail me. "Son, tell me the name," I insisted, fearing that the silence would kill me before the truth. He raised his eyes, and I saw him. I saw it all in them. Pain, rage, deep disappointment. A void that only forms when betrayal comes from someone who was supposed to protect you. "It was Uncle Richard," he said at last. I felt as if I had been hit with a brick in the chest. "Richard," I repeated, incredulous. "My brother," my son nodded slowly. My vision blurred. I leaned harder on the bench, trying to order the memories. "Richard, my younger brother, the man who came to our Christmases, the one who always had a joke ready, the one who held my son when he was a baby, the one who said I was too rigid and that he, instead, understood him better, the one who was invited to the wedding, the one who sat with the bride's family more than with us in the last months." My son kept talking. "Dad, the audios." He swallowed hard. "The audios show conversations between the mother-in-law and him." I put my hand to my mouth, feeling how disbelief turned into fury. "And what did they say?" I asked, although a part of me did not want to hear it. "They said you were an obstacle." My son answered, "that I was too attached to you, that if she wanted to control the relationship, she had to separate me from you first." I had to close my eyes. Richard, my own brother, the man I had helped so many times, the man to whom I lent money to save him from a debt, the man who always came to me when he got into trouble. He had said that, and why I asked, almost without a voice. Why would he do something like that? My son swallowed hard. Because the mother-in-law promised him a position in one of the projects they would finance if I got married. He needed money and power, and she knew how to manipulate him. I put my hand to my chest. I felt the weight of betrayal, like a hot brick. "Son, and you knew this before the wedding." "Not everything," he answered, "just parts. But yesterday," he lowered his voice, "I received an anonymous message. Someone sent me the audios." I stayed silent for a long time. The sound of the steps of the last guests leaving the church resonated in the background. In the distance, sirens were still heard. The wedding had turned into a field of emotional ruins. "Where is Richard now?" I asked finally, feeling my blood boil. My son pointed discreetly toward the sacristy. "I saw him enter there when they took the mother-in-law," he said. "He did not want to come close. He did not want to look at me. I think he knows everything collapsed." I got up. Something inside me had awakened. Something that had been asleep for years. An instinct of protection, of justice. Not toward me, but toward my son. "I am going to talk to him," I said, starting to walk. My son took me by the arm. "Dad, wait. I am not going to hit him," I responded, "but I am going to hear from his own mouth why he betrayed us." My son hesitated, but then let go of my arm. "I will follow you," he said. We walked down the side aisle. The echo of our steps resonated like a judgment. When we arrived at the sacristy door, we heard a noise, like something falling to the floor. I opened the door slowly, and there he was, Richard, standing, sweating, eyes red, trembling. When he saw us, he stepped back. "Arthur," he murmured, avoiding my gaze. "It is not what you think." My son let out a bitter laugh. "No," he answered. "Then explain to me, uncle. Why were you planning my marriage as if it were a business deal? Why did you lend yourself to manipulating my father? Why did you ally with that family?" Richard gritted his teeth. He rubbed his forehead. He was on the verge of a nervous breakdown. "You do not understand," he shouted. "You understand nothing. And she? She told me she could help me if I managed to convince you to get married." My son took a step forward. "Convince me," he repeated, "or manipulate me." Richard fell silent. I felt my heart breaking in two, not for him, for myself, for having trusted, for having opened my house, for having allowed him to be part of our life. "Richard," I said with a thread of a voice, "how could you do this to your nephew? How could you do this to me?" He finally raised his gaze, and what I saw in his eyes was not regret. It was fear. "I did not think," he stammered. "I did not think it would go that far. I just wanted a push to get ahead, and that justified destroying us," I responded. Richard began to cry, not a sincere cry, a desperate cry, a cry of a cornered man. "Arthur, brother, forgive me," but before he could finish, my son spoke with a firmness that froze us both. "No, forgiveness does not come today. What comes is the truth." It was then that my son took out his cell phone, opened a folder, and pressed play. The audio resonated in the sacristy, and what we heard changed us forever. When my son pressed play, the sacristy went into absolute silence. Only the distant buzzing of the emptying church and the sound of our contained breathing could be heard. Richard backed away until he hit the wall, as if deep down he knew that audio was more lethal than any blow we could give him. I remained motionless, with my hands clenched, waiting to hear the truth that for months had hidden behind fake smiles and looks full of poison. The voice that came out of the phone was the mother-in-law's. "Richard, listen well. If Arthur keeps getting in the way, your nephew will never be mine, and if he is not mine, there is no deal." My heart beat so hard I thought it was going to break my ribs. Then Richard's voice came in, younger, nervous. I know, but he is my brother? This is going too far." And the mother-in-law responded, with a tone so cold it froze my blood. "Blood ties do not pay debts, nor give you opportunities. Do what I asked you, and if you have to push him away, push him away. Your nephew trusts you. Use him." My son closed his eyes hearing that. I had never seen such contained pain on his face. Richard buried his head between his shoulders. The audio continued. "And do not worry about the girl," said the mother-in-law. "She will do her part. It is not difficult to make him fall in love. He is a noble and manipulable boy. Once married, he will be an extension of us. And I, finally, will have access to what I need." I felt my chest tightening. The air became dense, almost unbreathable. My son paused the audio a second. Do you want me to continue? He asked, without raising his gaze. I could not speak. I just nodded. He pressed play again. In the audio, the bride's voice was heard this time. She was laughing. Mom. Seriously. Arthur suspects nothing, if you saw how he looks at me. As if I were a gift from heaven? Poor thing. The mother-in-law let out a laugh. As long as he does not find out about... You know? The bride answered. He is not going to find out. No one will see that video. My son opened his eyes. That video exists. Dad, he said in a low voice. I saw it. I felt a dry blow to the stomach. What video? I asked, trembling. He kept silent, and that pause was worse than any immediate answer. It is a video of her, he said finally, with the other man, in the same room where they kept the wedding gifts, recorded just a week ago. Richard collapsed into a chair. Son, I told him, approaching. How did you find all this? Because someone sent it to me, he answered. Someone who knew what these people were doing. Someone who worked with the mother-in-law. I froze. Who? He shook his head. That part I still do not know. But the truth is that audio is not the worst. I turned my gaze slowly toward Richard. He did not even try to defend himself. He had his hands on his face and sobbed like a scared child. Richard, I said with a grave voice, do you have any idea what this means? He did not answer. My son continued. There is a second recording, one that... He tried to swallow. One that involves you directly, Dad. I felt the world stop. Me? I asked, confused. What does it have to do with me? My son sighed and lowered his gaze. The mother-in-law, he said, believed that you would never accept this marriage, that you could convince me to cancel the wedding. So she told Richard he had to weaken you, undermine you, make you seem unstable, that you were not in a condition to give an opinion. My throat closed. How are they going to achieve that? My son looked at me, and that was one of the most painful moments of my life. Dad, they planned to humiliate you, in public, repeatedly, until I myself asked you not to intervene in anything, until you seemed like an obstacle. I remembered every comment from the bride, every gesture of contempt, every mockery hidden in a perfect smile. I remembered the mother-in-law talking to me as if I were a beggar invited out of pity. I remembered Richard telling me not to make a scene when I had only tried to participate in trivial conversations. Everything, suddenly, fit. It was a plan, a well-armed plan, a cold plan, and I fell like a fool. That day at home, my son continued, when you said you had seen something, the mother-in-law thought you were inventing it, that you were starting to be a problem, and she asked Richard to silence you. I felt the blow before he said it. Silence me, I asked with a broken voice. What did they want me to do? My son swallowed hard. To push you to fight with them, to provoke you, to make you explode. And when you reacted, use it as evidence to declare you emotionally unstable. I put my hands to my face. They had tried to destroy me, destroy the image my son had of me, but they could not, my son said softly. Because you are not like them. Because you are decent, Richard cried uncontrollably. I am sorry. I am sorry. I did not think they would do so much. My son raised his gaze and interrupted him. You did not think, because you only cared about what you were going to gain. You never thought about us. You never thought about my dad. Richard raised his head desperately. Arthur, brother, forgive me. She promised me. I needed the money. I did not know it would go that far. I looked at him for several seconds. And in those seconds I saw all the years we shared, the memories, the childhood laughter, and how he had chosen to sell all that for an empty promise. No, Richard, I said finally with a firm voice. You did know, and you chose to do it anyway. My son turned off the audio. Silence fell like a final seal. No one spoke. It was not necessary. The damage was already done. The truth, finally, was naked. The only thing missing was deciding what we would do with it. Richard was still there, trembling, with red eyes and sweaty hands. The air inside the sacristy seemed to have become thick, almost solid, as if the betrayal revealed in those audios had filled every space between us. I stared at him, trying to recognize the brother I had led by the hand when we were children, the man I helped so many times without asking for anything in return. But on his face there were no traces left of the family I knew. I only saw the shadow of someone who had gambled our dignity in exchange for empty promises. "What are you going to do now, Arthur?" he asked, with his voice torn to pieces. I did not answer immediately. I had so many emotions stirring inside me: pain, rage, disappointment, but also something deeper, a clarity that only comes when you hit bottom, when one realizes that you do not need to raise your voice to recover your place. It is enough to let the truth do what it must. "I am not going to touch you," I answered finally, with calm. "I am not going to yell at you. I am not going to hit you. I am not going to humiliate you like you wanted to do to me." Richard swallowed saliva, not knowing if that was a relief or a threat. "I am going to do something worse," I added. My son looked at me, surprised, but not scared. He knew I was not an impulsive man. If I said something like that, it was because I had thought it through in those seconds of silence that seemed eternal. I approached Richard not to intimidate him, but to observe him closely. "Richard," I said slowly, "the truth is out, and you are going to live with it. You are going to carry this, not me. Not my son. You—" He opened his mouth to speak, but I interrupted him, raising a hand. "From today on, you are left without family," I continued, "not because I expel you, but because you yourself made that decision when you decided to sell us, when you decided to betray us, when you decided that your ambition was worth more than your blood." Richard broke down crying. "Arthur, brother, please, give me another chance." I shook my head. "Opportunities are given when there are mistakes," I said, "but when there are choices, consequences are paid." My son took a step forward, looking at his uncle with a mixture of sadness and strength. "Not only did you use me," he said, "you tried to destroy the only relationship that has always been honest in my life, the one I have with my dad." He stayed quiet for a moment, and then added that I will never forgive you. My son's words were harder than any punishment. Richard fell to his knees. His tears hit the floor like little drops of misery. I turned around. It was not worth continuing to look at him, and as I walked away, I felt a wave of strange relief, not happiness, not satisfaction, something more sober, more earthly, as if I were finally closing a door I should have closed many years ago. My son followed me toward the hallway. When we left the sacristy, the guests had almost all gone. Only trampled petals remained, empty pews, and an uncomfortable silence that still smelled of expensive perfume. Runny makeup and broken lies. "Dad," my son said, taking a deep breath, "do you think we did the right thing?" I stopped to look at him. "You did what was necessary," I answered. "The right thing is not always pretty, but it is always liberating." He lowered his gaze. I thought I was going to feel destroyed. He confessed, "But no, I feel clean." I smiled barely. That is what happens when one stops carrying weight that never was theirs. We left the church. Outside, the weather had changed. The sun hid behind a gray cloud, as if the world knew that something had broken inside those walls. The ambulance had already left. The mother-in-law would be being attended to in some hospital, probably surrounded by doctors she would consider at her level. The bride was sitting on a bench near the parking lot, alone, with her dress wrinkled and her gaze lost. She saw us approaching and got up immediately. "You cannot leave like this," she said, with a trembling voice but full of contained rage. "My mom is not going to leave this be. This will have legal consequences, social ones, Everyone is going to talk about this. My son stopped in front of her. I remained a few steps back. Let them talk, he answered. I have nothing to hide, she laughed, nervous. And what are you going to do when she sues us for defamation? My son tilted his head. Defamation, he smiled coldly. Everything we said is in those audios. Do you want me to publish them? Do you want the whole city to listen to them because I can do it? In a minute. She went pale. No, you would not do that. My son took out his cell phone. I wanted to bet she stepped back, trembling. Okay, she murmured. Okay, do not say anything. But I loved you. He shook his head slowly. You wanted my last name. My position. My future. Not me. She collapsed on the bench, crying. But it was no longer a theatrical cry. It was a dull, empty cry of someone who finally saw the castle fall. When we turned to leave, she shouted a final phrase. You are going to regret it. Both of you. My son did not stop. Regret is for those who lie. He said without turning around. We told the truth. We walked toward the car. The air was fresh. As if for the first time in months we could breathe without feeling a weight on the chest. Just when I opened the door, my son stood still. Dad, he said, looking at me with eyes full of something new. Thank you for being with me. I put a hand on his shoulder. I was always there. I answered, you just needed to see it. And as we started the car, both of us knew that the darkest chapter had ended, but we still had to face the outside world. An elegant revenge does not destroy. It reveals. And we had just revealed to everyone who we were, and who we were not. The next day, the entire city seemed different, not because the weather had changed, nor because something concrete had happened in the streets, but because we had changed. My son and I woke up in a world where there were no longer masks, nor lies disguised as love, nor external voices dictating how we should live. We had recovered something that life had been taking from us, little by little, our dignity. I woke up early, as always. I made coffee, black, strong, how I have taken it all my life, and listened to the silence of my house, a clean, honest silence. My son slept in the guest room, exhausted by the storm of the previous day. I let him rest. I knew that today would also be a difficult day, not because of the failed wedding, but because of the emotional weight that came after making such big and painful decisions. I looked at my phone, several missed calls, messages, notifications, the city talking, the in-laws crying on social networks, conjectures, rumors, people inventing heroic versions of the bride to justify the unjustifiable. But among all that noise, there was a message that caught my attention. It was from the unknown number, the same one that days before had sent my son the audios and the video. It is time you knew everything. I felt a chill run down my back. Everything. Did we not know it already? As soon as I finished reading it, I heard my son's steps coming down the stairs. He entered the kitchen with his hair messy and eyes swollen, but with a calm I had not known in him for years. Good morning, Dad, he said with a hoarse voice. Good morning, son, I answered, pouring him a cup of coffee. He sat in front of me, and for the first time in a long time I saw him relaxed, not calm, but relaxed. Like someone who has just come out of a storm and is trying to get used to seeing the sun again. Do you think it was the right thing? He asked again, with a hint of doubt. Not the right thing. I answered, the necessary thing. He took a sip of coffee and nodded slowly. Then my phone vibrated again, the same unknown number, this time an attached file, an audio. My son frowned. It is the same person. I nodded. What do they want now? He asked. I took a deep breath. I suppose to reveal what is missing? I answered. My son took his cell phone too, and then we both listened to the audio at the same time. A male voice. Firm, familiar, too familiar. Arthur, you do not know how difficult it is to manipulate your son without him noticing. But do not worry. Everything will be under control. I just need you to do your part. I froze. The world stopped spinning. That voice, That voice was mine. "Dad," my son whispered. "What is this?" I felt my legs failing me. I leaned on the table, dizzy. "No." I muttered. "That audio is manipulated. That is not the truth. I never said that." My son stared at me, not with distrust, but with fear of what it meant. "Dad, that audio? Why does something like that exist?" I passed my hands over my face. My mind worked at full speed. How could they have an audio of me? When had that happened? And then I remembered. A family lunch. Richard sitting next to me, his cell phone face up recording without me knowing. I was talking about a work project, with a friend using the phrase, "I need you to do your part." And he had edited everything else. "Son," I said finally, "that audio is cut. Lucas and I, the guy from the shop, we're talking about a job. Richard must have recorded the conversation and edited the rest to make it look like I was talking about you." My son took a deep breath. His eyes moistened with rage. He whispered, "they wanted it to look like even you were involved. They wanted to isolate you completely," I answered. "Remove me from your life, and then remove you from yourself." He put his hands to his hair. "This is sick, Dad. It is madness." I nodded slow. "Heavy." "I know. And we can no longer let it pass." It was then that my phone vibrated again. A new message. "If you want to meet the person responsible, come to the cafe on the corner in an hour." My son looked at me, pale. "Dad, what do we do?" "Let's go," I answered without hesitating. We arrived at the cafe an hour later. It was a simple place, almost empty, smelling of freshly baked bread and roasted coffee. The soft sound of cups clinking against plates accompanied us as we searched for the mysterious informant. And then we saw him, sitting at the table in the back, a young man, white shirt, serious expression, trembling hands. "Who are you?" my son asked as we approached. He raised his gaze. "My name is Daniel," he answered. "I worked for the mother-in-law for 2 years. I was her assistant, and I was also friends with your Uncle Richard." My son clenched his fists. "Did you send the audios?" Daniel nodded. "Yes, because she ruined my life too, and because I knew that you were the next victims." I sat down slowly. "Why now?" I asked. Daniel looked at us with old pain. "Because they were not going to stop. They already had a new plan, one that went beyond the marriage." My son swallowed hard. "What plan?" Daniel breathed deep, as if it cost him to say it. "They wanted to destroy you professionally. They wanted to accuse you of fraud in the company. Everything was ready. They just needed to marry you, so that you would accept signing something without reading it. That marriage was the key to your total ruin." My son ran out of air. I got up slowly. "Then you did the right thing by telling us," I said. Daniel lowered his gaze. "I did it, because I know what is coming now, and you must be prepared." My son and I exchanged a look. "What is coming now?" I asked. Daniel looked us directly in the eyes. "They are going to counterattack." My son squeezed my shoulder, and I knew that the real battle had just begun. Some weeks have passed since that day in the church, and although I still feel a knot in my chest, when I remember every detail, I can also say that something inside me settled. Finally, at my age, one believes one has lived everything: poverty, hard work, loss, fatigue, the old age that starts to peek out without asking permission. But no, I still had a lesson pending, one of the hardest, and at the same time, one of the most liberating of my life. I thought the biggest blow would be seeing my son walking toward a marriage that was going to destroy him. But no, the biggest blow was looking at myself in the mirror after the failed wedding and realizing that I too had spent years allowing others to define me, allowing others to laugh at me, allowing others to decide if I was enough or not. But that day, when my son stood in front of a whole church and defended me, something lit up inside me, something I thought extinguished for decades. Dignity does not age, it only waits. My son is firmer than ever, more awake, more conscious of the type of people he wants by his side. And although we still have a road to travel, wounds to heal, memories to sort out, we are together, father and son, as it should have always been, as it finally is. Richard never came back to look for us. His silence says more than any apology he could invent. The mother-in-law. She keeps trying to clean up her image, but the truth always finds a hole to slip through. The ex-fiancé, I do not know. I hope one day she understands that love is not built with lies. Daniel keeps sending information. He seems decided to reveal every dark corner of that family, and I appreciate it. But the most important thing is that my son today smiles without fear. And I, at my 67 years, learned that it is never too late to recover your voice. I am Arthur, and this was my story. Subscribe to the channel to keep listening to deep stories that touch the soul, like if this story moved you or left you reflecting. And tell me in the comments what you thought of this story, and from what city you are watching us. Your support keeps these stories alive. Thank you for accompanying me until the